Welcome to episode 10. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about Elon Musk and his philosophy on education and parenting. So this week, I did a lot of research behind his philosophy. This is someone that is very, very successful, someone that was the world's most richest people in the whole world, very, very successful. And I wanted to see what his thoughts were on parenting, but also on the education side of things. So in terms of parenting, I read a lot of things this week, but the main thing that stood out from the crowd was one piece of advice that he gave that really resonated with me as a father. And he said that your job as parent is to find the overlap between interest and ability. So what he says is, go deep in areas where your child has a strong interest and ability, and to find that Venn diagram. So one side of the diagram is interest, the other is ability, and where they overlap. As parents, that's our job, to find what that is and then to drive that and go as deep as possible and encourage your child in that area as much as possible. Now the next part is largely going to consist of Ad Astra Nova. And Ad Astra Nova means to the stars. And it's a school that Elon Musk created because he wasn't happy with the level of education his children were getting. So they were going to a private school in Los Angeles, I believe. And he just wasn't happy with what they were learning in school, the progress they were making. And therefore, he took one of their teachers, Josh Dunn, and created Ad Astra Nova. Josh Dunn is currently the co-founder of this school as well. So he says the following: there's no classes in language, music, sports, but most importantly, there are no grade levels. So children currently in school, traditionally, they are graded by the age that they are. So year 7, 8, and 9, they will make the children in there would be certain age groups. In this school, it's not like that. And the reason why he says there aren't any grades, because he believes that getting children in at school at specific ages, he compares that to an assembly line and said it just doesn't make sense, because different children have different abilities. And therefore, why are you holding a child back if his level of intelligence is that of someone older? So for his school, he groups them based on ability, and there'll be a group that may have someone that's 7 all the way to 14, because that's the ability that they're at. His school initially started with 9 kids the first week in 2014, and in a couple of years he had 50, so it wasn't a very large school. The tuition fees were very expensive. They paid nearly $30,000 every year, but he did offer free tuition and scholarships, and there was a rigorous application and interview to ensure that the children that did get into the school, they matched their ability level as well. So that's a bit of context for the school. However, I'm more interested in the principles behind Elon Musk's school. So the first is that he really pushes first principles teaching. And when I say he, I mean Elon Musk as well as Josh Dunn at the time. Now, this is when Elon Musk had a very, very big hold on the school. Now his children are old enough where they're no longer in that school. Josh Dunn now controls the school, but he's changed the name, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So when I talk about these principles, it's both Elon Musk and Josh Dunn, they drive home these specific principles. So the first is first principles reasoning. So what does that mean? So I've written down some definitions which I've tried to simplify it as much as possible to make it easier to understand. So one way that I tried to define it was, how could you rethink something in the way that is done in order to make it better? Another is the art of questioning each assumption you think you know about a given situation. And lastly, instead of saying that's the way it is, there is no other way, people are forced to think of different ways to try to do something. And I believe this has come from Tesla's way of thinking. So the way that Teslas have made their batteries and the way they designed it was using first principles reasoning. Initially, people were arguing that you couldn't make batteries cheaper. That's just the way they've always been. Every car manufacturing company or battery company, this is the way that they've created batteries. Instead, what Elon did was, with his team, they brought it down back to the basics and looked at the materials, the process, how something needs to be combined in order to form a battery cell. And they eventually found a way to do it cheaper in a different way and to make sure that the actual battery cells were a lot more efficient. And they used first principles reasoning in order to do that. And this is something that he embeds and ensures that his students and his kids do that as well. That the rationale behind that's just the way it is not accepted in that school. And this is something I believe we should push every single child to do. Just because we say that's just the way it is doesn't mean that we stop that discussion right there, because this is how innovation, this is how leap forward in technology are done, because we change the way people see certain things. I believe that it was the creator of Ford that said that if we did what people wanted us to do, we would have just created a faster horse. Instead of creating a car, we would have just created a faster horse. And that rationale and principle is you can bring that to anything in life, that if we just go by what people know and make that better only, then we'll just carry on getting better phones with better cameras, or the phone is a little bit more faster, or it's a bit smaller, thinner. But it takes someone that's thinking outside the box and breaking down the way that we think about things and just trying to think of it from a different angle. That's where innovation comes from. And this is where, if you look in the last 50 years, the biggest companies today, they've used first principles thinking, or they've tried to change the way things were done. The second principle is explaining the why, and this is something I've advocated even before I've read about this. And I feel that in school it's so important for people to understand, for students to understand why they are learning something, what the benefit will be, and where in life they'll be able to use it again to their benefit. And he believes that a lot of schools, and I know it when I went to school, that we don't explain why we're learning something. So, for example, if you're taught math formula without explaining why that formula is important, it creates cognitive dissonance. So your mind doesn't understand why they're learning it. And the human brain is created in a way where if you know what you're learning is important, then you're more likely to retain that memory. But if you cannot understand the relevance of something, then your brain automatically tries to discard that memory, because we can't remember everything. However, the dissonance lies where you don't know why you're learning something, but your teacher is saying that if you don't, you're going to get punished. And so that it creates cognitive distance in that way. And the punishment may be you'll get bad grades in your exam, for example. And therefore, I think it's very important for us to explain why we are learning something, or why we are teaching a child something. What benefit will it have, or what will be the real world application? The next is, and probably the most important, is teaching to the problem. So students are taught to the problem at Ad Astra Nova, not to the tool. The problem makes the tool relevant. So here he gives the example of the engine analogy. So what he would do is take an engine apart with the students and use the tools that he needs to take it apart, and then he'll put the engine back together again. And in that way, he will show them what each tool does. So these are the tools that you need to do it. The tasks make the tool relevant. So now they know the tools that they need, or the tools that they are teaching, why they're important, what you can do with them, and what process will you be using the tools for. What problem is it solving? Today, we just list the tools. So we'll talk about certain formulas or certain principles or concepts, and that's it. We don't talk about how these concepts relate to a problem. We are only teaching to the tools. So speaking about teaching to the problem instead of the tools, one of the most infamous problems created by Ad Astra Nova is called the Lake Conundrum.
Conundrums, created by Astra Nova School.
The Lake Conundrum. All right, I've got a question for you. Imagine this. There is a large lake next to a small town. A corporation, the town's largest employer, dumps harmful chemicals into the lake. Scientists, after studying the lake's health, agree that the lake will die in 10 years if the pollution continues. The puppet master, an individual who is afraid that new regulations could affect their business empire, decides that the conversation about the lake needs to be more balanced. The puppet master forms their own scientific research group called Scientists for a Clean Lake and pays a small group of the scientists to publish bogus research that claims that the lake has never been healthier. The media reports that a new scientific study shows that the lake is in good health. Politicians have the power to stop the pollution, but they decide that any action against the corporation is too risky since there does not seem to be agreement among the scientists and the company employs so many people in the town. The voters that live near the lake listen to the media, politicians, and scientists and become deeply divided and confused. They are not sure if the lake is nearly dead, in great health, or somewhere in between. The voters re-elect the politicians. The corporation continues to dump chemicals into the lake. 10 years later, the lake dies. So, who is most to blame? Option A, the corporation. Option B, the scientists. Option C, the puppet master. Option D, the media. Option E, the politicians. Option F, the voters.
This is the problem that students must solve. They must have a discussion together, do their research, and then ultimately come up with a rationale of who to blame, who is most to blame, and why. You can't decide on one or the other, or it's partly to blame between these two main people. You decide whose fault is it if you had to blame one person only. Now, the tools that a student would need and would need to learn about are the following. So I just made a list of things, some of the things that I would teach my kids and my students, and this is something we're actually going to go through, hopefully, once I've planned it effectively in the next couple of weeks in school. And I feel that it's very, very important. So these are some of the things that I need to learn about. Number one, ethics, moral principles, who's to blame and why, in what situation. Environmental science, so the impact of pollutants on the ecosystem and how much of an impact it has. Political science, so influence of politics or environmental regulation, lobbying, influence in policy making. Economics, the economic impact of environmental decisions. So if they were ultimately to have stopped that factory doing what they're doing, then what impact would that have in the town, the economic impact, the jobs of the people within there as well, who's going to get jobs for them, what's the state of the city going to be like if that company were to have been removed. Media studies, so the role of media in shaping perception and misinformation. Most importantly, critical thinking skills, to be able to think about the point you want to make, think about and playing devil's advocate in your own mind, and then writing it down and being able to speak effectively, articulate your point properly, and being able to have a good debate. Do you know what the rules of a debate are? And to listen when your opponent's talking, to write them down, and try to already anticipate the points that your opponent is going to make. So it could be either a public speaking, where you just come up to in front of the class and you use your oracy skills to talk about who you'd blame and why. Or it could be more of a debate where if everyone sides with maybe 2 or 3 main people, then they can argue their points and go to and fro and why their notion is correct and why the other person's notion is incorrect, and have that debate as well. So these are all the tools that they need, but these would all make sense to them because they would have seen the problem, they would have understood what the problem is and what they need to do, and therefore everything I'm teaching them has a direct relevance into what they're learning and why they are going to learn it. They'll know before I'm teaching it that, okay, when I learn about this, I can argue this point instead, or I can rebuttal the point that this person might argue if he picks a specific person to blame in that problem. So when it comes to Elon Musk and his philosophy on parenting and education, number one, find the point or the Venn diagram overlap between what is your child interested in, what does he have a genuine passion for, and where does he also have the ability in that specific thing, and find that overlap. When it comes to his philosophy on education, he really boasts first principle reasoning, explaining the why when you're trying to teach someone something, so there's no cognitive dissonance when they're trying to learn, and most importantly, teaching to the problem. When a student knows what problem they're trying to fix, then everything they learn that's in relation to that all of a sudden becomes a lot more relevant. And all of the things that I've learned about when doing this research, not only will I use it in the classroom with my students to try to give them a better learning experience, but also with Isa, and when he and the rest of my kids. A lot of people say that I'm just talk about one child, but all of them. But some of them are still very young, and therefore using these principles are not going to be as effective just yet. So when they're older as well, when I'm trying to teach him something, to try to explain to him why I'm doing something, and not accepting the reason of this, that's just how it is. And for him to use first principles reasoning when it comes to things, and thinking about exactly break things down to its basics and try to figure it out and try to approach something from a different way, a different aspect as well. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out so much. And I'll see you guys next week. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.